Welcome to BioInsights. This is I'm happy to be back today to really talk about cutting edge human health as well as data and innovation. I'm your host, Marcelo Aller, and today I have on our podcast Andrew Menter. He's a seasoned health and fitness industry entrepreneur. He joins us as the CEO and general counsel of Physmodo. Andrew brings a wealth of experience from his experience in law as well as in business. He has an MBA and a JD. He has corporate finance as well from the University of Houston. Andrew really has successfully launched several ventures, including Viviture and Kinetic Chain. Today, our insights and our journey is going to be about the innovation of optical technology with Physmodo. I first came across this product many years ago in a collaboration with TRX, I believe. So what I'm really excited about is in this venture, what inspired you to bring this into now a phone-based type of solution? Because in the past there was a proprietary camera. So I'm just really excited to see what inspired you to kind of make it more friendlier into the market.
Yeah, so timing wise, it's interesting. I was at Kinetic Chain, which you just mentioned, which is a sports medicine clinic. It's a different type of model, but because I'm dealing with a couple injuries myself, which are caused.
Who's not at our age, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's a good point. Mine are. I don't take care of myself and think I can still do the things from 20 years ago without repercussions. But yeah, not so. But I was there because I'm just having a problem with my TFL, hip flexor, and that area, and a lot of it stems from previous injuries. Achilles tear, ruptured bicep tendon. It's all on the left side. So I'm very asymmetric. And that's the number 2 cause of injury behind previous injury. So now I'm battling a lot of previous injury and asymmetry. And so I think a lot of injuries are preventable. And that was a bit of the inspiration because of my personal experience dealing with injuries and trying to do something about it. And that was the inspiration, and also to have fun because I did a couple things in my past life. You mentioned Viviture, which was nice and kind of cut my teeth in the entrepreneurial world. But we were working with college health centers doing insurance billing, and that didn't excite me. This does.
Yeah, and having that background, to kind of go into that, because I imagine the business background, but also the law background of understanding a system, and then implementing that as an entrepreneur has been really helpful in kind of creating these innovative strategies for a mission that you have passion behind, trying to help people be healthy. How do you do it now? How does it enhance that experience through the technology that you're implementing right now?
Yeah, you mentioned the partnership with TRX, and that was 5 years, probably. I think 2017 to 21. COVID changed the landscape of a lot in the fitness industry. But the started using the Connect 2 camera, the 3D camera in the Xbox, and one of the challenges there is, it's developed for video games.
Yeah.
And so needing to recognize, let's say you're playing any game, baseball, tennis, that involves a throwing motion or moving your arms, the camera needs to recognize your wrist and your elbow and your shoulder. But the accuracy is not terribly important. When you're measuring people's flexibility, joints, and trying to get objective data, it is. And so the initial challenge was creating a skeleton, as we call it, joint detection, that works for biomechanics. And we did, just using, a neural network, and was able to get a patented joint detection that does work for biomechanics. So that was great until I got a call from our COO one day getting off the plane saying, "Hey, just FYI, the Microsoft has discontinued the Connect."
Yeah, that's the dilemma in the tech space and in the development space. Being part of companies that have launched products, you're always you're always innovative, right? To take something off the shelf that's been done for gaming, that has the proper sampling rate to be able to accurately determine the body and the framework that you just described, is I think has been very innovative, especially since the advent of the internet and smartphones. I mean, it's pretty young. So to see that now and to see the evolution of it now, and being implemented in this space, you know, now looking back at the whole situation, right? Because you just shared with us that you learned a lot. If you had to do it all over again, what would be some of the advice that you would share with another entrepreneur that's looking in this space? Because it's not no longer really a blue ocean. It is a very red ocean, right? So what would you do differently today? Because back then, I think the cloud was the buzzword, but I know today there's a lot of other tech that I think is proper to bring up because you guys were doing some of it already with large learning models.
Yeah, so I'll even step back a little bit just for not necessarily industry specific advice, but the biggest lesson I learned with Viviture, because it wasn't it was an exit, but it wasn't what I'd hoped it would be, and it was working with higher ed with college health centers. It was a 9-month business, and we struggled in the summer. So it was a good business model that wasn't a great business. Ultimately, it was okay, and I kind of knew that going not going in, but probably 18 months in. And there are better ventures to tackle, and I did not. I spent 9 years doing it. So 9 years doing something I didn't love and that I wasn't so sure about. So my advice would be, if you don't think, well, obviously, if you don't do something you enjoy, yeah, don't do that. But also, if you see something that's not necessarily going to fail, but not meet your expectations, don't be stubborn like I was. It's okay to call it a day and move on.
I totally agree with you. I think people today, the one thing that because I'm at the point now, I'm not old, but I'm not young, and I've interacted with a lot of the younger generations, because in the workspace, we have those 4 generations now. And the one thing that I think the younger generation, I think, is a little bit more hipper to is to what you just exactly described, which is, I don't like it, I'm not going to do it. So it's really hard to motivate that Gen Z population, because they definitely get it, as opposed to, I guess, Gen Xers that have really always just grunted to work out and just persistence. And I would like to consider us a tougher generation. Not saying that the other generations are not tougher, but to your point, I think we have a very unique experience, and have still a lot to contribute. So how does let's get back to your product, to Physmodo. But how do you support now trainers, coaches, and operators with your technology? How does it help in their professional development?
Yeah, so one of the going back to the 3D camera,
Yeah,
one of the challenges there was yeah, we were a software company, but there was too much hardware involved, and we had a Dell monitor, the depth camera, and this big kiosk, which looked great, but it's pretty cumbersome and pretty high cogs. Now we ended up through TRX, getting, pretty good distribution. And we ended up in 28 countries, which was great. We have subsequently moved over to use mobile. So you're able to use it on the iPad and iPhone, Android device. And with remote training now being so prevalent, we had to have something that, could be used at the gyms in the four walls. We're in Stretch Lab. They have over 500 locations. We're in every location. And they don't necessarily need their members to be screening remotely, but it was important to us. So in order to screen remotely or self-assess, to start with that, you need to be able to use the front camera, because the back camera, while it's, LiDAR and 3D, if you can't self-assess if you're looking at when you're not looking at the screen. So, we were able to use that front camera and using inverse kinematics to really get the accuracy of 3D, which we're fortunate to get a patent on that. And so now a trainer can work with a client at the gym or wherever that trainer may be, and then also have the client with the mobile app, and the trainer it's just a greater touch point at that point to be able to work with your client you're training me and I'm doing some assessments at home, and you may see, because you're getting a dashboard with all of my information, you're also sending me some personalized protocols, and you see me one day, you know what, your shoulder mobility just dropped 15 points from your baseline. So maybe we'll adjust your training today. Or a good one, your hip mobility dropped a lot, and I've have you set up for 1 rep max on deadlift today. Well, we're not going to do 1 rep max on deadlift. And so it's just a lot of data for the trainer to gather to help the experience with the trainer and client.
It's what I refer to as episodic measurement, where you benchmark, and these are reference markers of a client or a patient. And what I love about it is, to your point, ease of use, remote, so I can monitor individuals. But as a practitioner that can go to that works with, let's say, a client, it's helpful because then I could identify that individual should be doing these types of activities. I know that in that workflow that you have, you've identified some of the biggest challenges for practitioners, which is standardizing now, because that's kind of the big thing. A trainer just stepping into the industry doesn't have the mentorship that in the past a trainer would have, simply because the business models are, one, so competitive, and operators, I feel, still are challenged with being successful at personal training. So getting data like this, I think, really applies. There's always 3 points of arguments that I always hear in the industry. One is governance. The other one is the agency of the technology. And then, obviously, the legality of running, let's say, this type of application with patients or clients. Of those 3, let's tackle them. What would you like to start off with? Would you like to start off with governance, agency? What would you feel is more appropriate to kind of wrap this up? Because I feel like this topic itself could be really, really important. That's the big topic right now in any software company's challenges right now.
Yeah, the privacy part, which I think can probably connect that to a couple there.
Security
is critical, and I mentioned we're in 28 countries, and no surprise that a lot of them were in Europe. So
GDPR compliance.
GDPR was quite a process. And that's fine. It's just a process, and you have to be really careful, and it's also different based on where we are. So, for instance, we're at the University of Tennessee, and working with all their athletes, and it's a place that had, a lot of places we go have had movement screens. We just offer a different solution. I don't like to go to somebody and try and educate them on the importance of a movement assessment. I think that's we just anyway. So Tennessee is different because they're subject to FERPA, and which is different. And so,
can you explain that to people that might not know?
It's basically HIPAA for higher education because I should know what it stands for. It's been a long time. It starts with the word family. So it's just different. So at Tennessee and at most places, people put their email in, and that's it. And at Tennessee, that was close enough to maybe identifying their name that it was a problem. So we had to get a special athlete ID. So and that's fine. So it was athlete 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we sent that information for athlete 1, 2, 3, 4 to the database that University of Tennessee is using, and what they did with it was what they did with it to comply. Now, we also had a policy: anybody, if they want us to dispose of all their data, then they just reach out to us, and we have to do that. So you have to be on top of that. Doesn't happen a ton. I mean, we're not so we're in a better position HIPAA wise because we're not diagnosing anything.
Mm-hmm. So that agency lies with the practitioner then.
Yes. So we're just giving information. So your shoulder mobility is this. We're not even giving the degree. We're giving the practitioner can see, okay, your squat depth is 87 degrees, but we're not doing that. We're saying, here's your score is 61. So we don't get into a lot of the privacy things that, if you're going to get, an X-ray or an MRI. So yeah, it's we certainly have to pay attention to it, more so in Europe, but not as much, let's say, as an MD, athletic trainer at University of Tennessee and so forth.
So you have the benefit of actually having a lot of a large learning model and a database that can help better today than most companies. How do you compare traditional models to the movement assessment that you offer now?
So we did not invent movement screens. The functional movement screen, the FMS, has been around for 30 plus years. And for those that don't know, it's a series of 7 movements, including the overhead squat, lunge, rotation, others, where a trainer or whomever gives the user a score from 0 to 3. 0 being injured, 3 being perfect, and it's a little subjective. So the challenges with a manual movement assessment are that you have to have someone there to do it. It takes a bit of time, and it's subjective. So with your max score of 21, you and I could give an assessment to someone. You may give them a 1, I may give them a 2. A 1-point difference when the max is 21, you're already 5% off almost. And I think that's too high. So what we tried to achieve was something that could be very quick, objective, and you don't need someone there. So so that's on the manual side. On the technical side, there are plenty of movement assessments, and they do more than we do. They do more movements. So, for instance, we don't do shoulder rotation, but we feel, and this was a big benefit of working with TRX and having Chris Frankel, PhD, sports science, and
his name carries significant weight.
It does.
By far the best practitioner and researcher, applied practitioner and researcher that I've seen. One of the, I think it's amazing the work that he's done. He's a professor first and foremost, but as a practitioner, I love seeing his presentations and his work. So I was really impressed.
Yeah, brilliant. And as a side note, he's not a salesperson per se, but was the best salesperson at TRX because all he did was educate on the benefit of a movement assessment. So that, became quite helpful. But getting back to some of the difference of us versus some others is we chose one movement, and we chose the overhead squat. That's you're going to find in every assessment. And again, we're not going to get everything, but we'll get 75 to 80% of what you need. Some people have come back and said, you're doing too much. Can you just do mobility instead of the stability and symmetry and posture? And no, but we're getting enough information and enough data to the practitioner trainer to take actionable, to take action with a client or patient. And so adding a second movement, third movement, yes, it gives you more information, but we had to balance that against what we were trying to achieve, which was quick, high throughput. You get objectivity also with, with multiple movements, but to be able to, self-assess and just get high throughput. The first year at IRSA or Health Fitness Association, as it's now called, we did 1,000 screens.
Wow.
In 2 days. So, we've stuck with one screen. Time will tell if it was the right decision, but I think it was.
I think it's all about development, right? So you have to do an MVP first, right? You have to have, and what provides a large data set that's meaningful and that's complex, right? I mean, everyone's going to have to be able to reach overhead, but then at the same time be able to change their center of mass and manage that base of support. So the industry that you serve is safe to say general public. Is there is there a medical side? I know that you've worked with athletic trainers and professional coaches. Have you worked in a PT space or orthopedic rehabilitation space as well?
Yes, we're working with. We have a contract with Northside Sports Medicine Hospital in Atlanta. They actually work with a lot of youth sports. We also have a large chiropractic chain in Canada, relatively new in that space. We certainly had to prove out our model elsewhere before we went there. And I think it's very helpful, particularly in that space, because you need multiple movements to be able to get a true baseline. And here's why. A lot of people using wearables these days.
Yep. Really
prevalent. Number one, I think, sleep. People talk about sleep, and you get your sleep measured and your HRV and so forth, a lot associated with that. Now think about this. Imagine you measured your sleep once every 6 months, or even every 3 months, or just every month. That's not good data because there's too many variables. Did you have a dinner that night and had a couple drinks? Were you traveling? Were you in a car? Whatever it may be. That's the same with movement. If you have that heavy deadlift day, you're going to be different the next day probably than if you had a rest day. So you need to get multiple screens over a period of time to get your true baseline. Now, here's why that's important. So now, let's say what your shoulder mobility is. You have a good baseline. You injure your shoulder. You have rotator cuff surgery. Your score is going to be a lot less. Now, how do you know when to return to action, whatever you may do? Warehouse worker, tennis player, pickleball, which 48 million people do now in this country, which is staggering. Well, you probably need to get very close to your baseline to be able to know when to get back to your activities. And so I think that's, again, coming back to why we want multiple screens and getting really the true accuracy for what your shoulder mobility is, so that on a return to play, and again, in the PT space and the chiropractic space, people are not going there because of they're trying to prevent injuries.
Yeah.
They've been injured. They're not moving like their baseline. But if you have no baseline, then it's I think it's more of a challenge.
I 100% agree with that statement. I've measured what I always refer to this as continuous data sets and then episodic data sets, right? Because you need to compose that digital twin is kind of the other top description of what we're talking about. Creating a digital twin of yourself, represent a representation of yourself, like how many minutes of sleep or hours of sleep and hours of sleep that you get in a night. What is your heart rate variability in the morning? What's your resting heart rate? How hard was that workout? And what was the after effect of that workout? Do you have anything that indicates your readiness? Or how do you perform under fatigue? Can that be measured or identified? And that's where I think episodic measurements are phenomenal, right? Where you can take that periodic peek of under the hood and see how effectively are they doing. So then I can also then identify, do I need to work more on stability? Do I need to work on flexibility? Or do I need to get them more powerful? So having multiple data sets, I often get business owners telling me, I need something, one, that's affordable, that fits within my business model, but also I need stuff that can provide me a better experience that I can have my customer go through and integrate within already my platforms that I use. How do you guys integrate with other platforms? How do you integrate with existing workflows? Do you have any case studies like that?
Well, I think it's more so of where we're going. But you did mention needing to have your customers, or wanting your customers to have a good experience. You use the word experience. Well, that's what we're trying to achieve. So by giving the customer the experience of using our technology, that's going to help even at the front end with customer acquisition, but certainly retention. I mean, I don't know what the stats are and how much more, how more expensive it is to acquire a customer than keep a customer. I guess it varies over industry, but we certainly help on the retention side. As far as integration, I like that because it lets me talk about what we're doing right now in terms of integration. And you brought up the word readiness. So here's an example of where I think that the challenge is. I went on a long hike over the summer in Arizona, which I don't recommend to anybody, but I did. And it wore me out. And I had a great night of sleep. And my wearable said my readiness was a 97 because I slept great. I had 4 hours of REM and deep sleep. And it said, okay, this is a peak day for you. Go get it. Something like that. The problem was that I was dealing with a meniscus. So I forgot that one also on the left side. And my movement score was down 20 points. So I wasn't ready to peak at anything that day. I was ready to lay on the couch and use some compression boots. So the challenge is, how do you take your biometrics and your biomechanics to get a true readiness score? So we're working with Rook, which is a company that allows, it's an SDK that allows the integration of wearable data into anybody's app. Great company, great guys.
Yeah.
And so that's the data we're now getting or about to get.
That's awesome.
And you kind of look at those correlations, and that's going to require somebody like a Chris Frankel and guys like that to say, all right, here's all this data. What is it telling me? Now we can do that on the pure movement side. So we can say, okay, Marcelo, you've had this, your squat depth is greater, you're getting better squat depth, but your forward torso lean's much worse. And now we're seeing that's probably because your dorsiflexion's not good. But now if we bring in both components on movement and other, that's where it becomes, we'll get incredible data, or incredible insights from that. And
physiological and mechanical,
yep.
It ties in. It's very holistic. It's really, I think what you're talking to is I think you're seeing a lot of people in the industry integrate, and I love to see the bridging of that, because I feel like we're still too siloed. I wish that we break down some of the silos and have the ability of offering a better experience to customers, right? Because that's really what it's about. It's also addressing the problems that we see in the market space, which is you're getting old, longevity matters, fall risk prevention, obesity. You're getting all these different types of customers. So if I was a trainer and I was grabbing your phone app, walk me through what an assessment would look like.
Yeah, it's again, it's fairly, what we think it's fairly simple. So you're guided on screen to stand in the right position, feet shoulder width apart, arms overhead, and do 3 squats, just as deep as feels comfortable. If you want to try and cheat it and get that greater squat depth and think you're getting a better score, you're going to lean further forward and it'll cancel each other out. But 3 overhead squats, and we're scoring your 4 components. First, you have a composite score based on your mobility, your stability, your posture, and your symmetry. Then you're going to have indicators on your top 3 issues on each of those, or if you don't have any, good for you. And there's a corrective exercise protocol based on how you're moving. So try to keep it really simple. And again, there's plenty of information there. And one thing I find particularly interesting is, one may think, okay, yogis would get great scores, and they do get great mobility, but the stability scores aren't great. And so it's just, you have to have both. And so, we're really focusing on those two, where we're saying, look, mobility and stability are very actionable. Posture and symmetry are more contextual, is the way we describe it. And again, there's just a lot of info. Those are the things we're scoring, and people can see based on a score and visually with the indicator where they're not injured necessarily, but movement patterns are not as good as they could be.
Stability is typically where they get hurt because it's eccentric. So, and isometric, right? So I always, I heard there's a great Coach Polkman, talked about, it's like you could be as powerful as you want to be, but it's like shooting a cannon from a canoe. And what ends up happening is you explode that cannonball out, but that wood doesn't have the stability, doesn't have the ability, the eccentric brakes to stop all that force. So mobility is phenomenal. You can create movement really well. Can slow it down.
And I steal a lot from Frankel, but I do give him credit. So it's the Ferrari with the Pinto engine, and so we look at, for instance, in the military, I don't know all the tests they have, but I think historically, and maybe it still is. So let's see how fast you can run 2 miles, and how many push-ups you can do in 2 minutes, and whatever. But how do you move? Mm-hmm. And they're very aware of that, and so that's why we've had, through TRX had a contract there with a branch. But yeah, I mean, it's looking at the data, it's the strong and powerful that are oftentimes getting some of the lower scores. And those are the people that are most susceptible to injuries, to your point.
Yeah, and I could see it. I've done FMS, I've done dark fish analysis, I've done several different technologies out there. And what I'm really happy to see in the space today is the ability to have something rank and rate someone fast. The score that you provide, that you've identified, uh, there's obviously research behind it, right? Can you kind of tell us a little bit about that? Some validation of it.
Yeah, so we just have thousands and thousands in the database. So it's really just a modified Z-scoring. It's norm based scoring. I don't love it. It
But it's fair to say each individual is an individual, so that reference mark is what really matters, right?
That's what we try to convey. Yeah. So if you're a little bit below average, so be it. But you're at a 44. Let's get your 44 improved. Don't worry about somebody that's getting a 56. Now, where I do want to take it, where we are taking it is, yeah, you can get your composite score globally, but also how do you do male or female, age group, even getting deeper, how do you do, against other soccer players or other goalies, even getting too deep. Now, we're not going to do that, but to my point, yeah, we can get a little more granular on the scoring, but I like what you said. Who cares what other people are doing? You have your score and get better.
Yeah, it's a reference marker. People want to have normative data comparison because I've seen CDC standards, right, that have now been, they're very subjective, like the FMS, now being digitized and kind of help you standardize. So you can then now better score it, and you don't have to have a high tech individual or a high PhD having to do the assessment necessarily, and it saves time for the professional then to be able to assess the data and have a better discussion with their patient or client or the athlete. Are you going to do any, like I know you said that we have our one screen. Is there when will you give consideration to maybe future development for upcoming features besides bringing in now physiological data that you just shared with us to Rook? Would you open it up and kind of say, hey, I want to just take a look at the squat, or I want to take a look at a lunge, or I want to take a look at some type of rotation? Is that something that you might want to do later on your roadmap?
We're asked that question a lot, and I highly doubt it. And a couple of reasons. Well, number one, I haven't gotten a business case where it makes sense. I do think,
I love that response. Thank you.
I mean, there isn't. We've gotten pushback once about a company that said, I need multiple movements, and it was a large gym chain, and I said, okay, well, we're not going to do that, but as a matter of interest, why do you want multiple movements? And their response was, we want to drive personal training business. And then I asked, well, why would you want a second movement then? You're just making it more difficult for your trainer, and you're making the education and the onboarding tougher. But yeah, if I get a business case, absolutely. Now, you may or may not consider this a product, but as I've talked about, is we're taking that data and generating insights. I look at that as the extension of our product. But I mean, and again, this is, he asked about advice early on, and I've heard it both ways, but I think if on a scale of 1 to 10, if you have a strength and it's a 9 or a 10, and then you have some weaknesses that are a 3 or a 4, I'm going to forget my weaknesses, because even if I get to a 7 or 8, there's somebody with a 9 or a 10 there. So we have a strength, we know what it is, and we're just going to make it stronger, is the way we're looking at it. There are, for those that want multiple screens, there are companies out there, and they do a great job. I actually see us as almost a feeder into some of these other screens. And yeah, you can partner with competitors, but if someone has a terrible movement score from ours, then yeah, maybe you want to dive a little deeper. So go try something else, but it's just not our business model. Don't see that happening.
No, I think you bring up a valid point, though, because at the end of the day, is the juice worth the squeeze? Are you going to then create a bad user experience? And I think that's what really matters. And to your point, then, if that person doesn't score well or there's something there, then that's up to the professional. So the agency stays with them. Once I get a score as a practitioner, is there a recommendation on what I should do with that score? You mentioned stability, you mentioned strength, you mentioned balance. Is there recommendations from the application itself as well?
Yeah, we look at that a couple ways. Just generally, we don't want to, as a practitioner, you're an expert in what you do. We're probably not as much of an expert as you are if you've been a physical therapist for 30 years. And so we don't want to push methodologies on you. What we do have is a recommended protocol based on your previous assessment. For the trainer, we'll have, here's some, hip protocols or shoulder protocols that you can assign, but also just take our library and create your own. And so it's a bit of both, because I think to tell someone here's the methodology and that's the only way to do it, I think is it's a little arrogant.
No, I think you're 100% right. The agency has to be with the practitioner at the end of the day, because the liability's with them, right? At the end of the day, they're the ones that are interpreting that data. And to your point, I'm not going to want to spend longer than 5 or 8 minutes on one explanation of an assessment. If I'm doing that longer, then it takes away from my business, and that's the biggest challenge. As someone that's operated clubs, in an environment of affluent individuals that are paying a lot of money to be able to see and work with a trainer, that is something that I've seen. It has to be. So it's just kind of interesting that you refer to, we want to have more than one multiple assessment. And it really is meaningless, because most assessments still are not effectively leveraged. So you could be more efficient with doing less.
I think so. And
yeah, it's about progress, not perfection. But go ahead.
And speaking of progress, you can show it quickly. So at clubs, you'll typically see body comp for the new member that comes in.
Yeah.
And I think that's great. It's a great data point. But there's a lot more that can affect your body comp than what you're doing in the gym. Say it doesn't even compare to what you're eating. So but let's just say you're doing everything perfectly. It takes, I don't know, maybe with Ozempic now or whatever, GLP-1s, it takes a week or so to get meaningful difference. But, let's call it a month before you're going to see meaningful difference. You as a trainer can give somebody a mobility assessment, give them 3 to 4 warm-up exercises and rescreen them in 30 seconds, and you can show a difference in how they're moving and the job that you're doing as a trainer by giving them those warm-up movements. So you can see quick progress. Now, if they come back the next day, they'll still have the same score because, but I think, to my point, you can see you can see improvement quickly.
Yeah, you're bringing up important human movement concept of the applied adaptations on that individual, that stimulus response, right? And it's it has to be practice. It takes longer to adapt. Fitness doesn't just happen right away. I think everyone has a misunderstanding of it because once we were young, we could train our way. We could adapt to fitness faster than to be stuck in another type of struggle. And typically, fitness today lasts longer. It takes 8 to 12 weeks to get in that level of fitness at this time.
Yeah.
So those are the biggest challenges that I see in the space itself. The one thing in impacting what you're doing now in the industry, where do you want to go in going forward in the industry? Do you want to be more in the general population? Do you want to be more in your teams? Because it seems like you could apply in various different types of verticals. Where do you see now the company going?
I think we work in multiple verticals, and we are. The market where we could probably have the biggest effect would be in the employer space. There was a study 10 years ago, the percentage of Americans reporting the following medical conditions, and 33%, I think, was circulatory, 28% respiratory. This is from healthcare claims. 13% was diabetic, which would be a lot higher now, but 54% was musculoskeletal. And so I do think we can prevent some injuries and reduce healthcare claims. Now, that being said, that's a very, very difficult market. So we may have some distribution, but not a market that we're that excited about. I think we can make a big difference in the military too, and we have a contract there, but long sales cycle. So where can we make the most difference the quickest? And I think that is in youth sports, in the personal training space, and in the sports medicine, or actually just any injury recovery, physical therapy, chiropractic. And I think we have the enterprise version and we have the mobile app. And I think where there's a lot of remote interaction, I think is where we can make a huge difference. And youth sports is certainly a big one. Personal training becoming more remote training. There's a lot there, and a quicker sales cycle too.
What's the cost on this?
Yeah, so on the enterprise side, we're charging there's no upfront cost, and it's $349 a month. And then for a mobile app, it's $8.99 a month, or $89 for the year.
That's phenomenal from a price point standpoint. And it's unlimited assessments and screenings?
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up, because pricing is very difficult to figure out, and I don't know if that's right, but it seems to be a decent spot. And so some originally said, well, let's charge on a per screen basis, or number of unique users for the month, and that really goes against what that's a little hypocritical if we go that route, because we're promoting doing as many screens as you can, and let's get as many for your baseline. And I don't want someone saying, you know what, I've screened 4 times this month and I'm not going to do a 5th because it's going to cost me a couple bucks or whatever. So yeah, unlimited screens, and I don't see us ever changing from that.
I think it's a fair price structure. It's really hard, the SaaS model. Even the cost to operate right now in the market space has become a big challenge especially now with inflation and the state of the economy, as far as some uncertainty, some instability for the short time being, because practitioners have to account for getting access to other resources too, because it's not just the app that they're using, right? They're going to have to buy equipment, capital equipment. If it's made of steel, there's a tariff now. So there's all these additional costs that are going to happen. Do you feel like it's impacted the software side in any way that you've seen? Because I think during COVID, I think we saw a lot of booms, but post COVID, I think we're starting to see some uh, return back to a kind of what this new normal is. So has that been passed already for you? Because a lot of companies have experienced a new normal in 2023 going into 2024. And now that we're in 2025, we have still a state that we're going through.
Yeah, I've seen slower growth, in gyms opening up, and I think a lot of that has to do with interest rates.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it, and yeah, now with steel costing potentially a lot more, that's going to be a challenge if there's a big hardware component, and there is a hardware component on our side, but I don't think people are saying, you know what, I'm not actually going to get an iPhone because of some of these inflationary reasons, because everyone has one. And my cousin actually has never had he's never had a phone. You have to email him or call him at home to get in touch
Old
with him.
school. Yeah.
No, he's probably the most sane of any person of anyone I know. So there's a reason. I think we're fortunate because again, we're an engagement tool, so we don't necessarily just compete with other movement screen softwares. We compete with hardware as well, and equipment, for instance. So because our costs don't change based on interest rates and tariffs, I think it puts us in a pretty decent spot. The challenge is there are fewer gyms opening up. There's fewer opportunities to sell our product. But kind of all over the place on that one. But my general thoughts there.
Yeah, it is. It is a something that I think every owner and operator has to consider. And if they're not, then they're not planning for the outcomes that they're desiring, right? Because we're trying to increase member retention. Let's use the fitness model, right? Member retention and then improving the ancillary revenue sources that we have. Personal training, retail store, other types of services that we can offer in our facility. And then what are those systems that we're developing to kind of create that lead going into that funnel? And really the biggest challenge is creating and integrating into workflows effectively. You brought up Stretch Labs. I actually visited one because I'm kind of blown away of the boutique environment, because when I was a trainer in New York City, we included that modality regardless in our practice. So we did dynamic warm-ups, we did a strength session, and part of that strength at the end of that strength session was flexibility and cooling down. So it's really interesting that now the boutique experience is kind of niching everything, right? Because some people might not want to have strength. People might want to just do stretch, which I think is interesting to see. But I think at the end of the day, everyone needs to move, right? So the be able to benchmark and take a look at that and kind of periodically look at my movement panel and say, hey, this is what I need. How am I going to age? For me, it's going to be how am I going to age? So that's really it. It's quality of life. It's making sure that, just like you shared. It's funny you say all your injuries are on the left side. Me too. Left meniscal tear too. So it is, because I've always had this argument. It's like, yeah, we're all asymmetrical, so what's the point? But the point is, you don't want it to increase, right? You don't want it to get worse. So what is that reference that you have? And then what should you be practicing in your everyday workouts, right? So it's really interesting. The market space going forward is going to dictate a lot of your decisions as an owner and operator. How do you want to communicate your company? Are you going to be attending any specific trade shows or events this year? Are you going to be in an area offering your services to a community and doing assessments? Because this, for me, is a no-brainer, and just putting up a tripod and walking people up to it and screening them, and then, giving them a postcard to come back to my facility.
Yeah. So, speaking of conferences, I was at the Connected Health and Fitness conference last week. So this movement is longevity theme, came up a lot. And another Frankelism is, look, movement is a vital sign, and that's what we want people to understand. Again, I think people understand movement's important, and we need to measure it. It's just how do we do it? But at the conference, there are a lot of great potential partners there, and I just tell them what we do. And there's a lot of movement assessments. No one gets terribly excited right away, but then I'd say, come over here. I took my water bottle, I put it on the table, I propped up my iPhone, and I went and did an assessment. And so then it got exciting, because that people saw the differentiator. So I think we'll be focusing a lot at a lot of the connected health and fitness, and especially and I think it used to be just the connected fitness, and then they added the health component. So again, because of this movement is longevity. So those digital health, wellness, fitness conferences, and I think they're going to be a lot more. We'll of course be at IRSA or Health Fitness Association coming up, and still attend those conferences.
I'll be there as well, so we definitely should connect. I would love to, for us at Total Gym, I love talking about strength training and load, right? Because everyone says, well, strength training has to be load, and I'm like, well, it doesn't have to be steel all the time. It could be your body weight, and you have to look at your base of support. You have to look at the vector that you're loading, and you have to look at the movement that you're doing. And that's where I feel it's come full circle. It really has, in the space where the longevity biohacking community has now. You see it with recovery modality, right? You're seeing it with hyper ice, compression devices that you mentioned before, pneumatic guns, blood flow restriction. You're seeing many ways to get fit. You don't have to necessarily be a member. I think the membership in a facility has to be a community-driven thing, and it has to go beyond just being a gym member. So you have to create that community environment. That's where I feel certain brands do really well. Exponential brands do really well. You're seeing Equinox, Lifetime Fitness do always their stellar job with personal training. You're seeing Orange Theory, Anytime, Snap. So the franchise models have a business model. So it's really hard for the small business companies really to compete. And it's gotten really harder to, because of capital reasons. As a tech company that you're involved in, has funding been something that's been a challenge for you guys? Because in talking to other tech companies on my podcast, that's kind of been a mixed bag. It's been a big challenge. I mean, I remember when I participated in that process, and it was a lot easier to get funding than it is today.
Yeah, I think funding's always a bit of a challenge. We have a couple new releases of our mobile app and the trainer web dashboard. And so we haven't even tried to raise money recently, but we're about to. So when I see you in a month, I'll let you know how that's going.
Yeah, that's the biggest challenge. I don't I'm not envious of that one for you at all. Uh, it it's always it's interesting what will manifest going forward, but I feel like the experience and the exposure that you guys have, you're well positioned in the market space, 28 countries, being able to say that you've worked with various different types of population sets and have normative data in that regards, age and gender, and is powerful. Um, it's nice to be able to compare someone, but at the end of the day, the individual needs to compare themselves to them. That's what I always tell, like, because HRV is a good example, and I can't help but compare myself to endurance buddies of mine. I'm an anaerobic athlete, but I've pivoted to running half marathons or doing more individual sports. I'll play the pickup game here and there, basketball or of other sports. But what I see is the HRV score with two of my buddies that are like at 70, 75. I'm just not that. My HRV is individual to me, so I can't compare myself to that. And yeah, it's lower. I won't say it, but
I'll make you feel better. Mine's in the upper 20s.
wow.
So,
okay.
but if I get like a 34, it's fantastic. I mean, I'm on the community thing with my niece who's a freshman playing college basketball, and she, hers is literally like 140. So she just texted me one day. She's like, why am I at 120? What's going on? Like,
Yeah.
well, you're 90 points higher than me, so well done. But it doesn't matter. To your point, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So
it's continuous measurements,
mm-hmm.
and then looking at the deviations, and if those deviations can indicate you're getting sick, it is associated with mortality. My point of bringing that up is your score in a team environment. Do athletes kind of boast? Because I know if I was playing league sports, I'd be calling out my teammates saying, "I scored an 81 and you scored a 60. You suck." It's like,
well, yes, because I mentioned we had 1,000 screens at URSA. It wasn't 1,000 unique screens because we had people coming back the second day, seeing how they were doing it and bringing their friends along. And TRX did a challenge, which was 50% was I don't know, maybe how many atomic push-ups you could do, and then 50% was your movement score. So yeah, it's used in that capacity. People like to compare to others, it's not just themselves.
yeah, I think it's healthy. That creates that community, but I also think people need to compare apples to apples as opposed to an apple to another fruit. And I think that's where the challenge comes because everyone's egocentric a little. It's just making sure that they understand what they're measuring and having educational curriculum or content that supports the product and drives the product is great.
Yeah.
So what I would love to offer our viewers, if they have any questions, please feel free to comment in the comment section, or if you want Andrew to answer anything else about the product, I will share your website. I will also share, if you want, give me your booth number. I'd love to kind of drive people to that as well. But I really want to thank you for participating in our podcast and offering our community another tool that they could have in their toolbox. So thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Marcelo. It's been a lot of fun.